Aw shucks. All the new RTX cards and Ryzen CPUs are completely sold out. Guess I'll just have to wait a few weeks for them to come back into stock. Fuck. Since the beginning of the Scalper Pandemic, a lot of YouTubers have been coming up with strategies on how to avoid it. Can't afford scalper prices on the latest GPUs? Try picking up an older graphics card to tide you over until stock goes up and prices come down. Can't compromise on performance? Well, you could try picking up a pre-built PC from an OEM like HP or Dell, or a system integrator like PC Specialist in the UK or iBuyPower in the US, and either strip out the component you need and resell the rest, or learn to live with terrible ventilation, bad expandability, bizarre component choices and the rest of it. A growing trend among those who don't have a PC at all is towards gaming laptops. To someone new to PCs, the specs on these laptops look pretty convincing. They have Intel Core and AMD Ryzen processors and GeForce GTX and RTX graphics, just like the desktops. So they're the same, right? Well, not so fast there, Sparky. Laptops have a couple of issues to contend with that don't give desktops nearly as much trouble. In order to keep to strict power, weight and thermal limits, the components used in laptops are limited compared to their desktop counterparts, and this means for lower performance than you might otherwise expect. During these trying times, however, people might be far more willing to endure limited performance than they otherwise would. When a £700 to £900 budget in 2021 might only get you a desktop with something like an i5-10400 and a GTX 1650 Super or 1660 or similar, the laptops available in this price range make for a tempting alternative. For most people, it could be difficult to build a PC of that spec for that price in 2021, whereas hooking up one of these cut-price gaming laptops to a keyboard, mouse and monitor could potentially make one of these laptops fill the role of a gaming desktop. That brings me to the Razer Blade 15 base model from 2020. Like most Razer laptops, this is a premium model that is relatively light and portable for its specification, though it isn't quite the ultrabook competitor its name might suggest. This thickness has merit, however, as looking inside reveals some substantial heat dissipation through the heat pipes and decent sized pair of fans. Spec-wise, we have a 6-core i7-10750H, 16 gigs of DDR4 via 2 user-accessible SODIMM slots, and 2 whole NVMe-enabled M.2 slots for storage. The star of the show, at least from a gaming perspective, is the RTX 2060 Max-Q, which, while slightly cut down compared to a desktop 2060, should help to drive the rather nice matte finish 144Hz 1080 IPS display to its maximum in esports titles and still provide a playable experience in more demanding AAA games. These laptops operate under stricter limits than desktops, and the Razer Blade is going to be more limited than some others. Heat, or the avoidance of it, means that the i7 and RTX components of this particular laptop may be restrained compared to other machines of a similar spec. Valorant is a CPU-limited game. This means that with a powerful enough processor, even decade-old GCN graphics cards can drive 180 plus FPS, so we should be onto a winner here. After configuring the laptop in gaming mode, the CPU is chilling in the mid 3 GHz range, and as a result, our powerful i7-10750H and RTX 2060 Max-Q can only skirt around 170 FPS. The same result I'd get from a desktop Ryzen 3 3100 and an old R9 270. Enabling Creator Mode in the Razer Synapse software pushes the CPU up from its base 35W configuration to 45W, enabling core boosts up over 4 GHz and an average FPS of 200. In the past, I've tested quad-core Intel i7s and found that hyperthreading can actually have a negative effect on frame rates in Valorant, so if I find time I might consider doing a deeper dive into that. Let me know in the comments if that would interest you at all. When I first installed Apex Legends on the Razer Blade, the game defaulted to high settings at 1080, which I thought might be a little on the optimistic side. However, I was proven fairly wrong, with an average score of just below 114 FPS and 1% lows of 70. This is more than enough for my needs, but I dare say it wouldn't take much of a trade-off in quality to get this game running at close to the laptop's VSync speed of 144. Horizon Zero Dawn performs beautifully on the Razer Blade 2020 even at higher settings. I'm almost tempted to play at 1080 Ultra as it averages only a few frames below 60, though for those looking for a smoother experience, dropping settings to favour quality sees averages of 66 and lows of 58. Given recent rumours of some collaboration between Sony and Nvidia, I hope to see a DLSS update in the future. If I'm being honest with myself, it kinda doesn't matter how well Warzone performs on this laptop. I'm never going to perform well in Warzone. The game defaulted to 1080 with mostly high settings, and that gave an average of 70 FPS with 1% lows just under 50. As this laptop has an RTX GPU though, I decided I might as well enable DLSS in quality mode. This now sees averages jump to 95 and 1% lows stay well above 60 FPS with little to no visible drop in quality. Running Fortnite at 1080 competitive settings, that is, everything to low, view distance to epic, shifts priority to the processor. After again changing performance mode to creator, this bumps up the clocks towards 4 GHz and in turn sees an average FPS of 180. This is not only exceedingly playable, but also meets the specs of the Razer Blade's 144Hz display. However, the GPU is still being held back by the CPU, often only running at 70 to 80% usage. For context, that 1080 competitive score is on par with a desktop PC running an RX 480 4GB. The frame rate at high settings averages 94, which is more comparable to a Vega 64. When it comes to balancing performance and quality, my instincts with Cyberpunk 2077 usually lean towards quality. Thankfully with DLSS, I can have my cake and eat it. Without it, 1080 medium comes just shy of a 60 FPS average, whereas pushing up to high and adding DLSS quality just edges over the line. If I were more inclined towards performance, there's a little room in the processor to get higher frame rates, but I'll talk more about that in another video. A smooth 60 FPS average isn't hard to find in Watch Dogs Legion here. In the canned benchmark, the very high preset only required one tweak, that is, dropping textures to medium to stick within the 6GB VRAM limit in order to hit the 60 FPS marker, with 1% lows of 56. Adding DLSS quality to the mix brings that average up to 73, though 1% lows don't budge. Ray-traced reflections throw another spanner in the works. It seems the CPU then becomes the limiting factor, as the high preset with medium RT gives a 52 FPS average with DLSS quality, and only just shy of 56 FPS with DLSS balanced. Assassin's Creed Valhalla should probably be played at lower settings on this setup, especially for that 60 FPS experience. At 1080 high, this laptop scored 48 FPS on average and 34 FPS at the low end, which places it alongside the GTX 1060 6GB and RX 480 8GB. I haven't tested the desktop 2060 yet, but the 2060 Super scored over 72 FPS at these settings. Forza Horizon 4's integrated benchmark has a ton of detail, and I was particularly interested to see its CPU benchmark. In essence, this is a bottleneck tester, comparing the maximum FPS available from the GPU and how that's been limited by the CPU or vice versa. The actual results were less interesting than I'd hoped. With the gaming profile selected and extra power thrown at the GPU, the CPU limit meant for an average of 122.8 FPS and lows of 102.6. Switching to creator mode reduced that CPU bottleneck by 1 frame. Minimums actually dropped slightly, so make of that what you will, but either way this makes for a very pleasant 1080 High gaming experience that does capitalise on the higher refresh display. Presuming you have at least 4 gigs of VRAM, Resident Evil Village doesn't pose much of a problem for most graphics cards, managing to look good and play well on even an APU. At 1080 using the graphics priority preset, with VRS turned off and with textures pushed up to 2GB, the Razer Blade eases through the test scene at 90 FPS. This is great performance, though not quite enough to make me consider playing with ray tracing. If you watch my channel a lot, you might have gotten the misapprehension that Doom Eternal is a hard game to run. It's not, but it does prefer new architectures to old ones, and I spent far too long reflecting on Kepler recently. In this instance, Doom Eternal and Turing get on like a house on fire, with ultra settings coming close to the laptop's VSync at just short of 139 FPS. Dropping to high will get you over the 144 average if you really feel you have to. It's weird how beautiful Valheim can be at maximum graphics, considering the 1990s aesthetic the game embodies. While I could have benchmarked it at medium or high with the effects turned off, I feel like this is how I'd probably play the game myself, though the depth of field effect does get a little bit annoying. With everything turned on, the game manages over 50 FPS on average, with lows of 34. Given the speed of combat encounters in game, I don't think you're missing much by dipping below 60. In the context of the Scalper Pandemic, a 2020 gaming laptop makes a certain kind of sense. An RTX 2060 should perform similarly to something like a RTX 3050 Ti, and 11th gen Intel isn't a big jump over 10th gen, so you shouldn't feel like you're missing out on much if this is the only spec you can get hold of right now. As a desktop replacement, while there's something to be said for one of these over a lower cost OEM pre-built, I feel a little bit let down by the Razer Blade. There's more performance to be had here, but the extremely locked down nature of this particular laptop keeps that performance out of reach. Intel XTU reports that the CPU is power limited, hence why it rarely exceeds 4 GHz. Using XTU to undervolt the CPU would normally be a great option that would allow for more performance, but that option isn't available here. If I had a wish list for the base Razer Blade 15, it would be for greater access to voltage and turbo boost functions. Also, I've heard good things about the Ryzen CPUs that are available this generation, though I don't have any personal experience with them, and Razer weren't using AMD CPUs at the time, so I couldn't make a fair comparison anyway. Hope that's been useful. Kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.